Okay, so this is the third video in the 3-video series on regular expressions. If you haven't watched the other two, you really do need to watch them to have this make sense. Okay, in this video we're going to be going to the next step. We've learned how to use the find regular expression command in the previous video, and what we're going to do is we're going to be using replace as well as replace regular expression in this video. As I mentioned at the end of the last video, I'm going to show you two methods on how to do advanced list cleaning, because right now we have a list of stuff we've scraped from the page, but we have to clean it up. We got to get rid of the extra spaces, and we got to get rid of the carriage returns. So we're going to do that right now. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to show you here is the kind of the long way of doing this. I'm going to show you more of a cleaner, compressed way of doing things. So this is the data we have right now, and let's look at how we're going to clean that up. I'm just going to get rid of this loop statement for a time being. Now, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a secondary list, and I'm going to be cleaning up the entries as I'm adding them to the secondary list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another clear list. I'm just going to call this temp. I'm going to do a loop statement. Number of cycles. Okay, list total, and it's going to be the main titles. Okay, now within this I'm going to do a add item to list. I'm going to select my temp, and within here the first thing I want to do is get rid of the line spaces. Now I'm just thinking about this right now, and we're going to have to remove a few things. We're probably going to have to remove a few extra spaces, line spaces, and stuff like that. So there might be an intermediary step. There might be a step where we actually assign it to a variable and then assign it to the list. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do just that. I'm going to create a variable. I'm going to call it temp variable. And I'm going to grab the next list item from the titles main. Okay. And I'm going to hold off on this command below here. So I'm just going to remove it for the time being. I say okay. So what's going to happen is when I go through this, it's going to grab the first variable, it's going to stick it in there, and we're going to start manipulating it. So we have to get rid of new lines. The easiest way to get rid of new lines is to just do a simple replace command. The replace command is underneath the text functions as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to do another set command here. We're going to set the temp variable, and we're going to stick the replace command inside the new value. Inside of text functions, we're going to look for the new line. Okay, I'm going to search for new line. I'm going to replace it just with a space. So I just hit the space bar. Okay, the original text is going to be the variable that we just assigned, though. Temp variable. Okay, unfortunately, this is not one thing that Ubot has, which is like a text function which is a space. So we have to remember when we're looking at our code in the future that we've actually got a space in it. Because when I say OK, it's not really intuitive what it is. It is slightly different than having nothing in there. Let me show you that. So let's go and put nothing in there. So it's not really intuitive, if you see what I mean. It's just slightly bigger. But it'll do for now. So let's do that. And I am going to then now assign this. After this has been set, I'm going to say set, oops, sorry, add item to list. And I'm going to select temp, and the item I'm going to add is the temp variable. I'm going to say OK. Oh, also I'm going to turn duplicates. I'm not going to let it delete the duplicates. Once again, I want to see my full procedure work properly before I start cleaning it up. Okay, so there we go. So we've got that. And I am going to say OK. Let's just run this. So in our temp we have 6 items as well. Now you see here we have a few extra spaces we have to deal with. Okay, there's spaces in front, spaces in the back, spaces in the middle, etc., etc., etc. So what we want to do is we want to get rid of a lot of those extra spaces. Now let's see where these spaces are being induced into the code. Before we tie them together, you see here there is a new line here for the original text, and there is all of a sudden it's together, but there's all this extra crap. Now we have to figure out a great way to get rid of that. Using a simple replace command, this might not be possible, simply because of the fact that we could be dealing with lots of weird things, like how many times, like let's say if I do a replace command and I say if I find 2 spaces, replace it with 1. I would have to run that command possibly in some of these situations multiple times to clean things up. So there is a much better way to do this, and that would be, because we've got the new lines out, we'll alter the temp variable once again. So we're going to do a set. Okay, I'm going to stick that in there. I'm going to say temp variable, and we're going to use the replace regular expression command this time. The original text is going to be temp variable. Okay, the text pattern, let's take a look at our cheat sheet here. I don't think we're going to have to worry about putting this into EditPad because this is pretty simple. What we're going to do is we're going to be looking for spaces that are 1 or more. Okay, so 1 or more, there we go. A plus. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a simple expression here. I'm going to say space plus, and I'm going to replace it with just a space. So this is going to capture 1 space or many spaces and replace it with just 1. Okay? Okay. Now let's run this again. Let's take a look at our debugger. Okay, so we're starting to get really close to where we want to be. We went from having, captured text on multiple lines down to 1 line, and we have only 1 space instead of multiple spaces. But notice here, you see how we have an indentation here? We might have some spaces before and after, and we got to get rid of that too. And Ubot has a great command as well to do that. We could do this with regular expressions, but there's a much better way to do that. Actually, let's do it with regular expressions, and I'll show you the other way, which is a little bit simpler. So I'm going to do another set here, and I'm going to grab the temp variable. Okay, and I'm going to do the replace regular expression. The original text is temp variable. Now, regular expressions have a way to signify the beginning of a line or the end of a line. Let's just take a look at our cheat sheet here. So the caret is the start of a line, and the $sign is the end of a line. So what I could do, let's say if I want to just strip off the characters in the very front, I can do a caret, and the caret is Shift 6. And I'm going to do a space, and I'm going to do a plus. Actually, no, there should only be 1 space because we've stripped out multiple spaces. And to replace the text to replace is going to be nothing. yes, I could leave the replace text spot empty. It's up to me. But for the sense of cleanliness, looking at the code later, it will tell me what's going on. I'm going to run this again. Let's take a look at the debugger. Okay, see that? All the text is nicely lined up now. So we've stripped it off. The last thing we could do is we could now use another regular expression exactly the same way as this, but instead of having the signifier for the beginning of a line and a space, what I would do is I'd do a space and a $, which signifies the spaces before the end of a line. So if there's one space sitting at the end of the line, I could get rid of that too. But like I said, there's a much cleaner way to do this. I'm going to set OK for this, and I'm going to actually go in here. I'm going to edit this. I'm going to get rid of this code. Inside of the text functions, there's a function called trim. Now the function, or the reason for trim, is to do what we just did all in one step. Trim says, here's a string of characters. If there's any spaces at the beginning or at the end, trim them down until they get to where there's no characters in the beginning or the end. So we can kind of nail two birds with one stone, or two birds, yeah, with one stone on this, and we can trim the characters. So we're going to say OK. I'm going to run it. Let's take a look at the debugger. And we've absolutely cleaned up our list here. If I click on here, and I do an edit, I do a copy. If I jump over to my notepad here, and I type that in, oh, okay, it's not going to show me that. Copy. There should be no spaces. There's going to be a small space before this. This is something that Ubot's putting in just in the beginning to signify the separation between the 0 and not in the actual text. But basically, we've completely cleaned up our text, and we got exactly what we want. Okay, but now we can take things one more step further. What we could do is tie all these steps together. So we have a set, we have actually a few here. So we're setting the variable to the next list item, then we're setting it to replace a new line with a space, and then we're using a regular expression to find extra spaces and replace them with just one, and we're trimming it at the end. Now the last thing we're doing is trimming. So when we want to put a command together, we want to tie a whole bunch of steps together, the very first thing we're going to do is trim. And let me show you what we're going to do here. So let's say I'm going to do a set command. Okay, I'm going to set the temp variable, and I'm going to pull the trim, because trim's the last thing we're going to do. But what am I going to trim? I'm going to trim a replace regular expression. So I'm going to put in here, replace regular expression. Okay, so what's my original text? My original text is going to be replace. Okay, but what am I replacing? I'm replacing a space and a plus with just a space. Okay, and I'm going to be replacing it from a replace. So I'm going to put a replace into here. What's my original text? My original text is going to be the actual temp variable. So I'm going to grab the temp variable, and I'm going to search for new line and replace it with just a space. Space. I'm going to say OK. Yes, you're right, this can get hairy pretty quickly. I'm actually kind of going to the nth degree. I could go one step further and I can put all these commands within the actual add item to list, but I'm going to save myself a little bit of grief. But you can do this, and when your code is working really good, this is something you're going to want to do. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the commands that I had created here, and I'm going to get rid of them. Okay, so let's see what's happening here. I'm going to be setting the temp variable, and when you nest commands within commands, things happen from the most nested command to the least nested. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to replace new lines with nothing. Actually, I think there's an error there. Yeah, I wasn't paying attention. New line with just a space. Okay? And then I'm going to replace multiple spaces with a single space. And finally, I'm going to trim it after everything is said and done. Now let's see if this is actually working for us. Okay, let's do a run. Now I'll tell you, it's really easy to screw this up. But look at here. We've done everything in one command. Now if I was adventurous enough, what I could do is I could take all of this to get this and stick it into this right here. Okay, and add it right into the list. Instead of adding it in a temp variable, I could do all those steps in there. Now, the last thing I'm going to want to do after everything is said and done is I need to get the temp back into the main content, or main titles. So I have to clear the original list. Which is main titles. I'm going to just do add list to list. Starting point or the starting list and the list to add, which is temp. Once again, I'm going to say it to not delete duplicates. And just to clean up things at the end, I'm going to do a clear list, temp. Okay, let's run this and see what happens. Okay, temp is empty, and our main titles is all super duper. So that's a really snappy way to do things. Now, in an earlier video, I promised you that I was going to show you another way to do the same thing. Now, it is possible to only use one list to make this happen, and what we're going to do is we're going to just use a few variables. But there's a lot of things that could go wrong using this method. So, would I recommend using it? When you get more experience, absolutely. I find that if you're doing a bot and you're using a lot of lists and such, it doesn't take long for it to start gobbling up memory, and it's usually when you've got bots that are doing a lot of stuff that this could become a problem. If you're just doing small stuff, it's not a big deal. But if you want to just a different way to look at things, this is what this part of this lesson is for. I've taught you everything I wanted to teach you in this lesson. But I just want to show you another way to clear and get the same results. So like right now, if I run this bot, I'll show you what the results I'm getting. I'm getting the main titles, and you notice the temp is completely empty like it was before. Doing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the standard clear list for main titles. I'm going to add the list for the bots here. Next thing I'm going to do is I am going to set a variable called list total based upon list total of the main titles. So the whole idea is I know how big this list is. So if I go underneath here, underneath the debugger, let me just bring it back up here. Sorry, it's just hiding. Being shy. The list total is showing 6. Okay? So I know how many entries are in this list. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to directly manipulate the list upon itself. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start using a list counter. So yes, I have to create 2 variables in place of a secondary list. Now I'm going to go through the list total, which is the variable we just set up here. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the same command set, like all the commands tucked together, like nested together, but I'm going to add it back to the original list. So you can see what's going on here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop the script right after that primary loop there. So let's just run this again. This is what we have. We have the original findings within the list, and then we have the cleaned up list, but we have it doubled up basically. Now, we'll want to get rid of these items in the front. And there was a time you couldn't do it in Ubot, but now you can, which is really exciting. And it is called a command called remove from list. Now, before I jump ahead here, I do have to show you something else. You notice here that I used a counter, an external counter to the list. I did not use the internal list counter. Why? Whenever I add a new item to the list, the internal counter automatically resets back to 0. Here, let me show you. So if I said just instead of using a counter and grabbing the next, like in the middle, I can right in the middle here, the next list item through using a temp, then what would happen is I'd mess up all my data because the internal list counter is resetting. Let's just take a look here. Let's just see what's going on here. Set internal list counter. And we're going to go underneath the I believe it's variable functions. List position. Main titles. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to purposely just set a dummy variable, set next list item, titles main, okay. And I'm going to place that just above the add item to list. Okay, I gotta just close this up here. So what's happening here? Technically, what's going to happen is the next list item is going to increment the counter within the list, the internal counter with the list, to the next list item. So it should be 1. But when we add something to the list, it resets it to 0. But let's just take a look here. I'm actually going to I'm going to do this differently. No, actually, I'm just going to stick a stop in here. Because it'll illustrate what I'm trying to get at here. I'm going to run this. Let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, see, the internal list counter has been reset to 0. So if we are going to add to the list, we have to be sure that we're not using the internal counter. We have to actually use an external counter, because every time we add something to the list, the internal list counter jumps back to 0, jumps back to 0, jumps back to 0. Okay? So that's the reason why I used an external list counter. So let me get rid of these extra values here. Okay. So let's go back here. Let's run this and see where we're at right now. We have the list doubled up onto itself. So now we have to get rid of these first 6 entries. What we can do is we can use a command called remove from list. Now remember, I actually grabbed the list total before I re-added the fixed list items to the list. Okay, right here. So I know how many entries were in the list before we started adding more to it. What I can do now is I can just run a loop and I can say remove from list main titles position 0. Now again, don't get caught thinking that you're going to remove position 0, then position 1, then position 2, but then position 3, up to position 5. Because what happens is when we remove position 0, 1 becomes 0, 2 becomes 1. Just to illustrate that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a simple stop here. Okay, so it's going to perform 1 remove from list. I'm going to run the command, and let's see what we have here. Okay, so video training in 10 minutes or less was the first sample. And then sample scripts. See how sample scripts is now 0? If I would have just counted 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are the list locations that I want to remove. What would happen is I would remove this one, and then I'd remove, when it switches up, I would remove the fast training bots, and I would leave behind the sample scripts. I would lose every second one throughout this list. And it's very possible I could actually fall beyond the list limits. So that's the reason why we are only grabbing the 0 position here instead of using a counter to grab it. Okay? Okay, so let's just run all these commands complete, and voila, we can get the same results using a slightly different technique. And I like doing this because it reduces the amount of lists that I use. But like I said, this is something that you would only do once you get really experienced, and you really have to watch what you're doing. Both methods are absolutely correct, and the reason why I'm showing you this method is to show you that there really is more than one way to get the job done, depending on what you want to use in terms of resources, how you want to do it. You know, the commands here could all still be broken apart. I could still be using a temporary variable to do the bits and pieces. It's no less valid. It's perfectly valid this way or the other way. The sometimes troubleshooting when it's all put together like this could be a little more difficult. Absolutely. But once you've got things put together, the nice thing about this is if I'm stuck and my code's not working properly, I could put a pause before and a pause after, and I can see if this sequence of commands is actually working. It's almost like, if you know what a define is like a subroutine. It's almost like building a subroutine right into one command. I'm basically nesting a whole bunch of commands together. I actually use this technique quite often. If you own the Pro version or the Dev version and you don't have the standard version, you can actually see the commands as a line listing, as textual commands, and it's a little easier to work with in that format. But the standard version can do exactly the same thing, and you just have to realize that you're still working with nodes instead of working with the code, directly the code. So, like I said, this is just showing you a different way. The biggest reason I want to show you this method was to show you how to use the remove from list command, and how to do things a little differently. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope that you learned that you can use things like cheat sheets. Don't be afraid to use the search engines like Google, Bing, Yahoo to search when you have a problem. Recently I had a problem where I had random line feeds within a page, and I had to find a way to get around that. And I had to search around for a little while, but I did find my solution. And don't be afraid to use tools like the edit pad to show you what you should actually be putting together. And remember, build your lists or build your regular expression, and when you get pretty close before you do the, if you're going to do remember we did assertions. If you're going to do look ahead or look behind, what you should do is you should actually save what you have in a notepad here. Oh well, yeah, I did wipe it out in the middle of the exercise, but put it over into a notepad, because when you put the look ahead, look behind into the code here, sometimes EditPad will lock up, and it's just the way it is. It seems to be a fairly complex move within Regex, but it works really good. So I hope you got a few things out of this. I hope you learned how to strip out your code. Whenever you're working directly with the code here, you are working with raw code, and you're going to have to do a little bit more text manipulation. But sometimes the results can be rewarding. It can be a lot easier, and you'll pull out a lot less hair than you would if you just used the standard commands. And that's pretty much the primary reason why Ubot put in those commands, the replace and the find regular expression commands. Fantastic commands. I hope you enjoyed these videos, and be sure to check out other videos in this list. Thank you so much.